Okay. I think we're at critical mass, so why don't we go ahead and jump on in? Hopefully everyone was able to receive the documents okay. Sorry about some of the snafu with the links. I tried to be clever and do them all via links on the first go, and that failed horribly, like Kevin saw. So we did a mixed bag on the second round and with some mixed success. So thanks everyone for being here. Bond Accountability Committee meeting with the goal here is to review our 2020 bond options and costs. We do have a full agenda. We've got a lot of people who are going to walk through the materials. So we'll jump in. It's usually on virtual not efficient to do a lot of intros, but maybe what I'll do is I'll just walk through all the BAC members' names if you just want to say hi real quick. And then we'll do the same. I'll do the same for our board members if they're here. Then we'll let staff introduce themselves as we go forward, if that makes sense. So, Kevin, do you want to say hi first?
Hi, I'm here.
All right, thank you. Do we have Beth? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Tenzin.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Tenzin. Thanks for joining. Cheryl. Okay, maybe no Cheryl.
I see Cheryl's name there. Maybe she doesn't have a mic on.
Oh, I think we got Cheryl. Maybe she's just listening. I think I saw Karen.
I'm here.
All right, right in the corner. Good morning, Karen. Dick Steinbergy.
Yep, I'm here.
There he is. Tom. Tom, are you here? Oh, I see you, Tom. I just can't hear you. And then Greg.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, Greg, thank you for joining as well. And then for our board members, Chair Constam, I think, yes, I see Amy Constam is here.
Yes, thank you to all our BAC members. Thank you for your service.
And I see Director Michelle DePass is here.
Yes, I am. Hello, everybody. And I apologize in advance. I'm going to have to leave in about 5 or 10 minutes due to a work emergency.
Understand.
And that's a meeting that's ready soon. Enter the meeting pin.
If it sounds like we have a little feedback from someone, if everyone doesn't mind muting until they're ready to speak, that would be great. Julia Brim-Edwards, Director Brim-Edwards is here, I see.
Good afternoon, everybody.
I believe Director Moore, did I see?
Your call.
Okay. I haven't, are there any board members I'm missing? I don't see any other names on here. Director Scott or Director Bailey or Lowry? Okay. I think we're good. So let's go ahead and jump in. Our agenda ostensibly today is we're going to do a bit of a recap. This is the 5th meeting for the Bond Accountability Committee to look at the 2020 bond costs. Then we're going to go into the details of the numbers, review the documents that were shared, and then talk next steps. Before we get into that, though, we have a guest comment today, and so I'm going to invite Jonathan Garcia to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Garcia. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer here for the school district. Good to see everybody. I am really excited to introduce a good friend of PPS, a good friend of the district, of our work, a champion of our work. Rukiah Adams, who is here with us. I'll have her explain a little bit of her role. Over the course of the last week, we as senior leaders have heard that our community, particularly our Black elders and our Black leaders, have been eagerly designing some ideas about that could transform Portland and transform the way we think about public education in our city. And it's connected to some of the work that this body talks about. So Rakaya has about 5 minutes or so that would like to just share a little bit about that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rakaya Adams from Albina Vision Trust, I believe it's the last piece of it. Albina Vision Trust, I'm seeing a head nod, to share a few remarks.
Thanks so much to the board and to the volunteers doing this amazing work. I can't believe you've had 4 other meetings and I've not had a chance to listen to your thoughts, and thank you for making time for me to the community members who are watching this. I appreciate you engaging in the ways that you do for our community. The reason why I wanted to have a chance to address you directly, and by the way, I'm moving offices, so sorry for all the mess in the background, is that in this moment, as we are struggling with the way that we take care of each other in the town square and having deep conversations about Black Lives Mattering and the role of our civic institutions in support of the messages we're hearing from young people in the street, what is clear to me is that PPS's mission is at the center of all of it. Those are young people in the street, their youth, a lot of the ideas they've learned in public schools. They are marching, many of those marches are beginning at public schools and making their way to important civic monuments. So your mission, your professionals, your students, your volunteers, your properties are right at the center of this moment. And as you consider this bond issue at hand, I want to really have you think about the ways that you can use the bonding capacity and the thinking to build a model for shared prosperity and commonwealth, and to think deeply about the way that the decisions you make can create transformational investments in people and places and help us all begin to take better care of each other. In that regard, I'd like to share a few ideas with you. And you can interrupt me and try to get through this in a few minutes. I'm just tossing this idea out to give you a sense of where the community is going. But one of the ideas that we have for the bond is to think about creating a center for Black excellence, not just improving the capital conditions of a single building in Jefferson, but thinking about all of the schools that serve the Lower Albina, the students of Lower Albina. In particular, what we want you to do is to think about how we displace the school to prison pipeline that we know has been so challenging for us to deal with. This is our opportunity to face it. And in particular, we want you to think about how we can create a school anchored environment that supports excellence and learning. The way we think you can do that is by including in your bond thinking funding for the improvements at Jefferson as a center for Black excellence that would include the schools in the area, Kairos at Humboldt. It would include Harriet Tubman. It would include some important community-based organizations that serve those children and their families, like Self-Enhancement, like POIC, PCC, and some really important locations in the community, like the Gordley House for Gathering our community, the churches in the area, and then the work that we're doing to envision the redevelopment of Lower Albina, where the BESC site is. By the way, we'll share this information with you so you don't have to absorb it all right now. At a high level, this is an abstraction of what we're saying, is that we want to use bonding and facilities and PPS's mission to create a constellation of support for Black children with proven models that work for them and their family, right? Culturally based models. So this is a visual abstraction of where we're headed. One idea would be to fund a children's quarter around the PPS headquarters, wherever it is, whether it's at the BESC site or maybe an alternative site somewhere else like Concordia, or there are a few other options, but to really push you to think about creating a place where children's theater, museum, athletic facilities health institutions, maybe even playgrounds can gather, so that your mission begins to impact the quality of life of children in the city, not just inside the classrooms. I think you can do that. The third part of this idea would be to consider the headquarters of the PPS space for an alternative use that would be designed around the role and the places of the life of the child in the city. So we have some really big ideas about how that 9 acres where the BESC sits can be used for dense, affordable family scale housing to engage children in this zone where they're supported, they're known, they're encouraged, they feel safe. In the end, what we're trying to say is that this decision you're making about improving the physical space of some schools is really important, but we hope that you will lean into the moment and your place at the center of it to help us all support each other in improving outcomes for children, not just in the classroom, but throughout their lives and in their place in the city. That's the high level idea. It's a lot to take in 5 minutes, but I believe this committee can do something really exceptional, and I hope you invite me back to talk a little bit more about it. But for now, I'll stop. I think that was a little more than 5 minutes, Jonathan.
That was great. Thank you, Rakaya. I very much appreciate that. So I think to wrap that and to draw that nexus to some of the work that we're working on now, and specifically the 2020 bond. The 2020 bond is the district's opportunity to invest in significant capital improvements. The Albina vision is an opportunity to align the capital planning and capital dollars with PPS's vision. We bring this here today because this has come about fairly quickly, this opportunity. And there will be decisions that will need to be made about a bond to go forward in November of this year pretty quickly. And exactly how all those things marry, there isn't final decisions on that yet. So that's still going to be worked through. This group today is going to talk through some of the scopes of work that we've been reviewing to date. But we didn't want to have a specific conversation about the improvements that were in that box and then instantly turn and say, oh, and leave this committee out of the conversation of there's other scopes of work, there's other mission-driven work that could be folded into this bond as well. So we wanted to make you aware of what some of those activities are.
Hey, Dan?
Yes.
I realized that I launched into that diatribe without sharing the presentation with the committee. That tells you that I'm clearly technology challenged. But I understand that Natasha may share the presentation with you all in your side panel, so it's in there to illustrate what I had to say. My apologies.
Yeah, no problem. And that's actually a great segue to another detailed note I wanted to make. In this Google Chats feature or Meetings feature, there is the chat function. So you should see at the top of the screen looks like a little chat, and then there's probably a red one in there. If you click on that, there is a link to the presentation. And also, if you would like to put in a comment or question, feel free to use that chat feature if you would like. I'm going to ask Marina if she can kind of monitor that as we walk through the presentation. I can't always see, or whoever's presenting can't see the chat. So I'll ask her to monitor that for me as we go through. So before,
Dan,
yes.
Before you jump in to the link to the 2020, I just want to thank Rakaya for bringing this forward. I think we have an opportunity in a moment in time to really, especially as I think about the presentation and the idea of how it links to our vision, and then linking it to actually, linking it to not just, we just last week linked it to our operating budget for this next year, but linking the vision also to our capital bond program that we've committed to for the next, several decades. And I think it's a great moment in time for us to look at, we've had a fairly traditional modernization program in health and safety. And this is sort of an opportunity for us to link the capital work that's happening with the vision that was developed and then the operating budget that just was adopted earlier this week. So I just want to thank Rakaya for injecting, I think, a new and important element in our bond planning work.
Yeah,
Dan, can
thank
I
you for
jump in
that.
for a second as well?
Absolutely.
Because I appreciate the presentation by Ms. Adams, and it's certainly, you know, brand new news to all of us, and sounds pretty exciting. But I don't want to disappoint her as we move forward through this meeting, because certainly my understanding, and I think yours, and I've been certainly reinforcing this with the committee, that the scope of our work on the 2020 bond is on essentially the estimating function rather than what's in, what's out. That's entirely a board issue. And so it's certainly useful to know that the existing scope of the three options may very well change, and that's certainly helpful. But it's not something that we're going to be looking at to say we should be adding this, we should not consider it, any of that concern. So I didn't want Ms. Adams or any of the other folks involved in this thinking that we're not paying attention to this. It's just not part of our portfolio, if you like, at this point. So
I do understand that. I just wanted to make sure we were respectful of the amazing work that you're doing and that you hear it first before anybody else.
Yes, thank you very much. That's really important to us. Now, Dan, I guess the only impact this might have on our meeting is, has it been determined that any of the items that are currently listed will no longer be in the bond program, in which case, of course, we wouldn't even look at their pricing. I'm assuming that's not the case, but if that is the case, maybe you could tell us that.
Or
Yeah.
Kevin, Dan, I'm happy to interject, since this is a board process of developing the bond package. Thank you, Kevin. No, the answer to your question is no, and we're still engaged in our community process to figure out exactly what these components will be. We still plan to lean heavily on your advice and expertise as a committee around the estimates that are essential components to the bond scenarios that are in front of us and in front of the community. And to Ms. Adams' presentation today and our ongoing discussions, that's very much a part of the process that we're in with the community now. So we respect your role, and we're grateful to have your expertise, and the rest of that bigger process is on the community and on the board.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Amy.
And I think before we go further, our superintendent would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Dan, and I appreciate the board, our director's remarks as well. But I really want to appreciate Rakaya for opening up the meeting with sharing, I think, what's a bold, innovative concept, and always appreciative of the BAC's role and volunteerism. It's just that when, you know, there's a key word in public education, it's public. And how do we sort of bring that word back so that the community is central to the work that we do? And if we want to strive to being that world-class city that serves children, youth, and families, you can't extricate the K-12 school system as separate from all of the other components that make for an environment that supports families. And so I think it is important to share that there's this emerging idea out there with the BAC, regardless of its official role, because I agree, we have had historically this traditional approach to our bond work. But if there's an opportunity to support, particularly at this time, a real changing tide and refocus to putting Black youth in particular at the center of our work in a way that aligns with what our board has heard are our strategic priorities moving forward, that has a racial equity agenda that I don't think everybody's as bold about just putting out there. And so what that means is that you have to be willing to look at your policies, your practices, the way you resource manage, to put our students who most need us to show up for them, to put them at the middle of any work that we do. So I just appreciate, Rakaya, thank you for sharing with the group thoughts and conversations that are happening out there. I do think that we should be listening right now and thinking about what role we can play as the K-12 school system here in Portland. And I'm looking forward to any way that the board suits our direction as staff to support and partner in those areas. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Guerrero, and thank you everyone for providing some opening comments. I think it's great context to talk about a future bond, which is going to be a very large capital improvement. So I think we'll jump in now. So everyone, please be prepared for some drier topics going forward. We'll start with a recap to try and get everyone up to speed. I know we've got some new BAC members and other people who haven't been a part of this so far. So I'll try to do a quick recap, and then we'll jump into the meat of this. So let me attempt to present successfully, and we'll get going. Okay, I trust everyone can see my screen okay and hear me okay. If you cannot, go ahead and just yell at me. So here's our agenda. We're going to jump right in. We had our guest comments, and we're going to the recap. So a recap of the process. We've been bond planning for over a year now. We started having meetings with our school improvement bond committee, I believe last October. And we tried to take a somewhat linear approach to how we have these discussions around what makes up a future bond package. And so the first thing we did is we look back at what some of our guiding documents are and what the district has done in the past. So to date, with the board, with staff, and with community through committee meetings and board work sessions, we've looked at the district's plans that we have in place. We have a long-range facilities plan that's kind of our seminal capital guiding document. It's high level, but it provides direction to staff. We have an intentional plan of doing a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar capital improvement program. So this is what we're talking about now is really a piece of a much larger, much longer term capital program. And we've looked at what we've done in previous bonds. What's the scope? What's the criteria we use to select that scope, and how those decisions have been made. We've looked at what our needs are, our educational and our facility needs. We recently completed a facilities condition assessment for the entire district. That was completed earlier this year, and we have looked at that information. Staff has also gone through a lot of effort to prioritize what the educational and facility needs would be. They've gone through exercises and we've presented and we've talked about what those priorities are. Cost data as well. Our facilities condition assessment gives us some nice cost data. It's pretty high level cost data. It's not project specific, but it does a great job of giving us some portfolio estimations of what our overall needs are. And we've also done conceptual master plans for 3 high schools, and we've looked at all of those cost estimates as well. And of course, we do like to point out that all of our cost estimates were early on in our process. We're talking a very large program over a number of years. Our estimates, our budgets, they will change over time. And so this little graphic is technically called the cone of uncertainty. We like to bring it out every once in a while just to say, we're going to make decisions about cost the best that we can with the best information we have right now, but we know over time they will become more defined, they will become more specific, and they will change. And so we use strategies to help mitigate and manage those changing costs. And staff options. We have looked at different staff options. We've looked at quite a few different options over the course of a number of months. They've ranged from under $600 million to almost $1.5 billion. They've included 0 new high schools, 1 new high school, 2, 3 new high schools, opening other schools, detailed scopes of work, asbestos abatement, PE improvements, lots of different options. And I think we're coming towards the end here. And then the next phase is community input. Our community input process has started. We are looking forward to hearing more from the community. We have a town hall tonight that should be informative. And the intention is these are kind of the 5 key components of making an informed decision about a bond proposal. Here's a list of meetings that we've had dating back to October. We've met a dozen or more times with either the board subcommittee or as a board work session. And then 4 times previously with the Bond Accountability Committee starting in November. February is our last meeting. And note there, the March 17th work session was canceled. That's when the COVID pandemic was really picking up steam and things got put on hold for a while. And we'll touch on these lightly here as we're going to get into the specifics of all of these scopes of work. But right now for our public comment, we have 3 options that we are soliciting feedback on. And to be clear, this isn't a pick A, B, or C. These are just 3 different options, a low, medium, and high, and we're trying to get some feedback on that. The eventual package could be very similar to one of these, or it could be different depending on the feedback and the decisions made. And a couple of other quick items that I think will help set context as we go through the details that people might have questions about. So I'll try to answer a few questions right up front. Something that the BAC has covered in the past is our general estimating process of what we do for our scopes of work. We typically start with our hard costs, and then we estimate on top of our hard costs, soft costs, any fixtures, furniture, and equipment, contingency, and then escalation to get the total for that scope of work, whether that scope be a specific project or a more generalized scope of work. Our hard cost data, we really used whatever our best available source is. Some of our scopes, we've got good historical data on. We've been doing roofs for years. We can get some pretty good numbers for cost per square foot for our roof scope of work. Other scopes of work, we don't have as much internal data on, or we don't necessarily have professional cost estimates, so we're going to use FCA data or whatever is best available. And the conceptual master plans that we have completed for 3 high schools, I think it's good to note that those conceptual master plans had a specific goal when we started them. The goal was to get a generalized budget and scope for each one of those schools. So we want to have some early conversations with stakeholders, with the community, and have a design team on board and say, if we're going to look to modernize 1 or more of these schools, generally, what do we think the scope is, so that we can then take that scope and we provide it to a professional cost estimator so that they could provide us cost estimates that would be our basis for our hard costs and our budgets that would go into a bond. It's worth noting that after the bond, if 1 or more of the high schools are in, we will complete a comprehensive master plan where we will engage more with community and stakeholders. And that will be just like all of our other large projects. That master plan will be approved by the board, and then we'll move into the design phases. Something that we have talked about over time is the importance of flexibility in this bond. We have a compressed schedule to make decisions to meet a November ballot. Community input is pending, so we're waiting to hear from that. And then that will modify or inform our decision making. As we heard, we're still considering new and revised scope. So it's going to be important that we have flexibility to adapt to that to some degree, even after a bond is approved. And we've got other ongoing initiatives that are related to capital and the district's portfolio. Our long-range facilities plan that I alluded to earlier, that's required to be done every 10 years. So we are required to have an update done by 2022. We are starting that process right now with an RFP going out soon and anticipate that being done in 2021. So that might inform some of our other capital needs going forward. And we also have an enrollment balancing process that might identify some other capital needs over the next couple of years. And they're jumping down, there's a couple ways that we can include that flexibility and manage those potential changing scopes and costs. One is a program contingency. You'll see that all of our options that we include a 10% program contingency that ultimately gets spent on the identified scope of work, but that allows for these changing scope needs if they arise. And then the bond language. In the materials, we provided sample bond language that we've looked at before. That's by no means intended to show you what exactly the language of the bond will be. It just shows you with the way that we write the actual bond language, it can provide a certain level of certainty for what scope will get done, but also flexibility to adjust to changing needs and costs over the course of the bond. Oh, I had a couple fun graphics that I ruined by talking to that too fast. And I think lastly, some next steps about scope development. Once we have a solid bond package, we will go into developing the 2020 bond completion plan. So that will have more specifics about criteria for project prioritization, staffing plans, how we would sequence the improvements and other details. But that just looking forward of some of our next steps. And then this very quickly is some dates that as we look going forward. We have our town hall tonight. We have a school improvement bond committee next week. In July, we will have a work session where we will look at community feedback. And then ultimately in July, we'll also need to refer. And then that will start the process for submitting the ballot title and getting on the November ballot. Okay, now we're going to jump into the main section. So here's how we're going to walk through the scope sections. This is consistent with all of the options that we put forward and all the discussion that we've had. We've used these same categories of work. So we're going to stick with that as we go through this. So we'll start with the modernization scope and the 2017 bond balance.
Dan, can I jump in for a second?
You can.
Thank you. I just want to put some of our members' minds at rest, especially the new members. You know, it's true that we've had a handful of meetings generally on this subject, but most of them, or in fact all but one, as I remember, have been kind of non-specific. They were just kind of letting everyone know what the process has been. And lots of this data that we now have was not available before. And so this is the first time we've seen these, and all the other meetings were pre-COVID and different bond package, et cetera, et cetera. So in many ways, I think we're kind of starting from scratch here in terms of reviewing the pricing mechanisms and procedures that you're putting before us. So I don't want anyone to be thinking, oh my God, I'm 4 meetings behind here. How am I ever going to catch up? Lots of this stuff is brand new to all of us, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that context. Yeah, certainly some of this information is brand new, has never been seen before. And I think others too is we're looking at it in a finer point, if you will, or in a different context. And so this is actually probably a pretty good example. So the bond balance. So when we look at the bond options, there's always been an amount to complete the 2017 scope of work, which includes the Benson High School project and the multiple pathways building that is on the Benson campus. And that amount, which we rounded to 200 million, you'll see in the options, is the delta between the budget we have for that work and then what our estimate at completion is. And so the delta between those two, so these are directly from the BAC meeting in May to show you that nexus of the 2012 scope and the estimate at completion and the 2020 bond and that amount that relates to the 2017 scope of work. So I'll let Marina walk through these next couple of slides if Marina is there.
I am here, Dan. And are you moving on to the next slide, or am I walking through this one in particular?
If you would like me to, I can.
If you could, that would be great. So for this, this is essentially a summary of the project management cost report, which is a standard report that we provide to the BAC members. This will look familiar to all of the numbers should look familiar to the BAC members. It summarizes that project management cost report. It also adds in the detail from the 2017 program cost report. So these numbers should match up with everything that you received in the May meeting. And essentially what you're seeing there is the numbers showing what we are underfunded for Benson, and then how some of the numbers in the 2017 program portion of the budget play into that as well. So you'll see our bond management numbers, issuance costs, OSIP, our insurance program, and some funds that we are holding aside for potential impacts from the corporate activities tax. All of that essentially comes down to that subtotal that you're going to see in yellow, the 1.1, and the delta number 291. When we take out the bond premium that we discussed at our previous BAC, and we take out future interest earnings, so we apply those dollars towards the delta amount, we end up with the 201 that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. So I think what this is essentially saying is, while we certainly talk about Benson as being the project that has been most impacted by the underfunding of 2017 bond, the bond as a program does make up for some of those impacts. And so this is really an underfunding of 2017, and Benson is the project that tends to get the most impact for it. So we've added all those pluses and minuses together to get to that 201 number. Dan, would you like to add anything?
I think the only thing I would add is just, this is trying to highlight a couple things that within the estimate completion, we include program contingency that we anticipate spending, but also include our bond premium that we have received and future interest earnings that we have yet to receive, but that we have estimated that we will. So I think with that, I'll pause here and see if there's any questions.
I have an observation, maybe more than a question. This is Kevin. I've tracked what you're doing here. Essentially, the options provide for $200 million, right, for Benson and MPG, and we have a $202 million shortfall according to this this analysis, which is about where we are. I guess the misgiving I have is that obviously and we'll get into an analysis of the Benson estimate and MPG estimate. So taking them as a given at this point, this is kind of a big picture concern. What we're saying is we are going to take everything from 2017 except about $28 million of program contingency and say that will take care of 2017, and therefore our shortfall will never be more than $202 million or $200 million. Now, to put it in context, the $28 million that you set aside as to complete 2017 is 6% of the unspent money. And I think it's fair to say that we all thought that the program contingency for 2017 was insufficient in the first place. So I just wonder why we should all be so comfortable in saying that our shortfall is $200 million based on just a remaining 6% program contingency. because the last thing we want, of course, is to backfill this shortfall and then find that we don't have enough money in 2017, right?
I think, Kevin, if I understand the comment is, we have program contingency noted here that is there to cover all scope of work of the 2017. And I think what I might be hearing is you saying the question of, is that sufficient or should it potentially be higher? Are we comfortable with that number? Did I understand that right?
That's right, because we've got, we've hardly started Lincoln. We're what, 40%, maybe 35%, and through Madison, and we haven't started Benson at all. So there's still, and I understand each project has contingencies and all that stuff, but is a 6% program contingency on remaining funds yet to be spent in the 2017 bond sufficient? And you can't give me a yes or no. I mean, this is an issue for pondering, I think, rather than saying it's right or it's wrong.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I actually appreciate that saying that's something to think about, and it's probably something for the BAC to think about. Is that does that seem like the right number? It's the estimate that that staff puts forward, but certainly there are variables that come into play here, and we're certainly happy to have more conversation about that. If after the BAC ponders that a little bit.
And Dan, this is Greg. So how comfortable are you with the future interest amount of $22 million? Is that a realist? Do you know that that's what you're going to get?
That is a great question. I wish I had my finance person on the line to talk about specifics. In general, we've talked about it. It's been a little while, so I can't remember some of the specifics, but we are clear that that is a conservative number. That we think, pretty confident that we will get at least that amount. And I could follow up some more specifics on that as well. I'll add that to my list.
Dan, there's a question from Director Moore for Kevin and the BAC. The question is, what % of contingency would you consider more appropriate or more in line with industry standards?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, it could be anywhere up to 10%. I would have thought, but it certainly varies by the type of program. And I'd be interested in any other members' experience with regard to that.
Well, this is Greg. I mean, typically the program contingency is larger the less we know about it, and smaller as we are into the projects and we've got the design done, and even as we've gone so far as to bid it. So at this point, 5% is typically when you actually get into the, if I remember right, when you get into the project itself, and we're sitting at 6% in a kind of a budget position.
So this is Dick Steinbergy, and I guess I would share Greg's thoughts that it seems like 10%, and Kevin's comment that 10% would be more of a minimum at this point, given that Benson, as Kevin pointed out, hasn't even started yet, and Lincoln is just barely underway, and those are two of the biggest ticket items remaining that will carry forward.
Okay, I think we do have a lot of ground to cover. We'll push on. We're happy to come back to this too, and as we continue having dialogue to talk about this item more. I definitely think for something like this, we want to make sure we're really comfortable on where we are with contingency. We certainly, worst case scenario is looking to have to do another bite at the apple for 2017, and we want to avoid that, of course. So I'll move on to the next topic, and coincidentally, it is about the Benson High School project. So at this time, I will stop sharing, and I will turn this over to our Senior Project Manager, Brian O'Leary.
Thanks, Dan. Is my audio working okay? Okay, thank you. My screen is just about up. So while this is coming up, appreciate the time today to bring forward Benson. And I'm going to go through the information that we have. It's a lot of data driven in the numbers. So I'm going to try to go through this, staying sensitive to the agenda you all have today. And we'll try to be efficient through the slides that I'll talk to. And certainly if there's any questions at the end, welcome any questions or fill any gaps for today that as needed. I believe this first page, we provided this as part of the packet that Dan and Natasha sent out. There is some additional slides that are back up to this that provide some information on the individual projects that I'll go through as well. So,
hey, Brian, can I stop you real quick? This is Dan, and it might just be me, but is there a way to maybe make your screen larger? I can see your PowerPoint, but I can also see others as well. And maybe it's just me not functioning properly, but if there's a way to make it bigger.
I will not quite sure how to do that. Or is everybody else kind of seeing the same thing? Is it kind of small on their side? This is a little better. Is that any better, Dan?
It is better. It looks like you have a split screen going on. No one else is complaining, so I'll be quiet. And that is better that you zoomed in.
Okay. Okay, we'll give this a shot. So what we wanted to show here is what we provided is the summary of as we all know, the Benson work is really more of a mini, being approached as a mini program. It's got the 4 projects within it, Benson, MPG, and then the swing sites at Marshall and Kenton. So we provided here an overall summary of our current forecast that include estimate information that's come in up through these, even as of late into these last few weeks. On this summary also, we included this time not only the overall program costs that are on the far right column, but also knowing that specifically contingencies were being looked at, we added some summary information below that hopefully gives you a clear idea of what's currently included in the program. The totals that we have shown in the green section of the overall summary are denoting the contingency percentages outside of the GMP or outside of the anticipated GMP cost. As you know, the 3 sites, Benson, MPG, and Marshall, are going to be under CMGC contract, and we always carry an owner's contingency within those contracts. So what we've denoted here is that we have this contingency, the 9, 11, 13, and 15 outside of that. We've also noted the combined amount and what that percentage is, both inside and outside. So for a total project, what we have for contingency in the kind of the salmon colored row. And then what we did provide here was so kind of help facilitate the discussion on a summary of what that OSM standard contingency would be. So for instance, on the modernizations or TI work, it's typical to carry 15%, or that's the benchmark, the goal benchmark for OSM. And on new construction, such as MPG, that's 10. So I wanted to kind of clarify just in real numbers where we were at. So where that brings us for overall on the program is that for a $357.7 million project or program, we are currently carrying a total of $46 million. of contingency, both inside and outside. So for a total owner's contingency of 46 million, which is about 13% of the overall program. That is showing that if we were to bring that up across the board to OSM standards, we're currently $4.4 million short of that overall on the overall project of 357. Oops, sorry. I'm going to back this out just for a second. So what I was going to walk through is I'll start with Benson, give a summary of where we're at to date on that target value for construction. We had the development of the target GMP has certainly developed over time. We had a realignment of that target GMP here in April, March end into April timeframe. We had revised that target value down from 225 that we had been carrying for a little while through SD, and in DD we had to adjust that down. I will say that was my error in a team error for the forecast that we had projected for MPG that we had been carrying at the time, and when we realigned that to correct that to get it back to the board approved level, we found that error and made that correction in April. The VE effort has been continuing, as you can imagine, through the design development phase of the project. The team has done a great job to get not only down initially to the 225, but then beyond, nearing very close to our $212 million target. And I'll show a little bit more detail on where we're at in just a moment. We'll say, and I think it's important, that the team has a very high level of partnership. That's a tremendous effort that the team has gone through. It's a lot of scope and to look at to get that much out of what was initially included in the project and under assumptions that the design team was making. So my compliments to the team to sticking it out together. Currently on Benson itself, the overall contingency is at 12% for a total of 42.2 million, which is, as noted earlier, about 3% just for this particular project under the OSM standard. Part of what we have done that plays into that contingency risk, we shared in the spotlight a few months back about the work that's been done in the existing conditions survey. We're spending I think we're spending definitely a higher majority of money or funds in this early work than we have before, based on lessons learned that we had come out of grants pretty specifically. And so we have really done an extensive amount of work both last summer and starting into this summer on the investigation work of the existing conditions. And that's really doing a lot. We're finding, and I want to recap, we're finding a lot of results about the building that are much better condition than what we found at Grant, for instance. And so there's two components to this that really help us on the project team. One is we're finding things that are in better condition. So for instance, at Grant, we had a lintels and brick that were in horrible condition, misrepair over time. And so that we spent a lot of money, change order money, dealing with. Here at Benson, the detail of how the building was built and constructed and crafted has been much different. So we found that the lintel angle looks almost, it looks, I want to say brand new, but it is in perfect condition with every one of them that we've opened up so far. So we've been able to reduce that, we think, as a risk. The pull testing on the brick has come out all in good favor, so we don't have the same conditions that we were finding over at Grant. And so we've been able to, that's done two things for us. The conditions that we found that have been better than what would have been assumed, we've been able to reduce that design contingency. So the factors, for instance, that KPFF is designing with, if they don't know, or if they're assuming based on previous knowledge of PPS structures, they might inherently build in a contingency for themselves in the design strength for that existing material. And what all this work has been able to do is to let them right size that design criteria and so thus reducing the amount of structure that we have to account for. The other thing that it's done is that we found conditions that go the other way that were worse than assumed. Like, so for instance, we found some URM walls that were first assumed to be concrete or masonry behind it, or solid masonry. And so, but finding that out now has been able to allow us to build that into the base design, and we'll be able to bid that into the base scopes versus paying change order rates once we're under construction. So that has been an advantage in both ways. Yeah, example of some of the areas that we recognize we are not going to be able to solve through the early investigation work. We're not going to be able to tear the building apart in some locations to get down to where we need to discover these conditions. There's examples of that, or like say at the footing connections between the auditorium building and the main and what will be the new resource center and building called Building B. Conditions like that are really impossible to do while it's occupied. So we recognize that we still have areas of risk to engage with, but we feel like are far reduced from what we were initially anticipating at the start of the investigation work that started last year. I also want to recognize and point out that we have not started this formally yet. We have a process to gauge risk. We have a risk register, but the process that has been done most recently, say at Madison and Kellogg, in terms of the risk register process and reporting that back out to the BAC, I just want to note that will be coming here soon for Benson as well, as we move into a little bit further along in the design, and certainly get into more of the stage where we've negotiated the GMP with Anderson.
Brian, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little confused. When I first saw that spreadsheet, I assumed that we had a construction estimate of $212 million, but it sounds like that's our target budget. Do we have an estimate based on 50% DDs or 100% DDs? Where are we?
Yeah, we did set the target GMP. It was based on information that we had from our third-party estimator. So we did have an estimate that was backing that number up. I will say that the estimate that we had from CFI, who's our third-party estimator, where this was established from, was set at the master planning phase. So that's what we were going from in order to establish this number here.
Right, but do we have a construction estimate based on the current design?
Yes, and I'll show you in a moment where we are at with that number.
Okay.
I think that's what it's getting into here on this slide here. So we started out, and I know that there's a lot of information to get through. Certainly, I think this will be made available to you, through the course of the meeting. If I'm correct, Dan and Marina, the updated presentation will be made available.
Yeah, we can make it all available.
Okay. So what we wanted to show is that we started out, the target GMP was, like I said, is at 212. The initial SD estimate that right out of the gate that came from Anderson was at 246. That was back in August of 2019. We went through a pretty extensive scope alignment and both scope alignment and VE process. So back in October, that started to come down. The next real big benchmark was and review for the team was done around March of this year with the DD estimate. The initial Anderson estimate was at around 237, and with the VE effort included in that, got us to got us closer to our target. So we were at about 219.6 at that point. As we've seen in other as we went through that process, we obviously knew that we needed more items to close the gap to get down to our target. So we went further to get to this point and looked at further alignment in the quantities and estimate itself. We went through a significant redesign effort. So at this point, we were removing the design for the vestibules at the west exterior. We were looking at redesign of buildings A and B pretty significantly. That's the auditorium and the building B that holds the library and resource center area. And went through an alignment of scope for, say, immediate occupancy, and have most recently been working with the team. We've got an ongoing VE log and cost reduction log that we've been tracking weekly, and the team has been working in different focus groups to work on those ideas. So currently where we are at right now, as of numbers pulled around 6/18 or June 18th, that the DD estimate, we've had the DD estimate at 237. We've got a list of VE items that we have implemented into the project at 20.8. And so we are within $4 million currently of that target GMP. Things that we're going to be looking for further now to close that gap are, again, we've still got a lot of work we feel to go on the auditorium interior and that building, including other class functions that are also included in the lower level of that auditorium building. But there's certainly a lot of work to go there. We're looking for opportunities currently in the estimate. We have a number of allowances that we feel deserve another look, especially after this round of summer investigation work, that we feel are contingencies that need to be looked at. We've got things like the solar strategy, and making sure we don't have any overlaps in the scope there versus what's included in our requirement for the 1.5% spend on energy measures. And we also think we got quite a bit of room to go with efficiencies in the MEP design and certainly alignment of our IT systems. Initially, I would just say that for example, I don't think that they had a good handle. This current designer didn't have necessarily a good handle on what the PPS standards were and overscoped that area quite a bit. So this is just a sampling of the options we have. As you can imagine, we've got a pretty extensive VE list with items yet left to price and left to work on in order to close that gap. But our goal is that we are coming up on the end of DD, so 100% DD set is going to be scheduled to come out at near the end of August, and that's our goal, is to close that gap by the time we get to. We're going to continue to work on these ideas, and that the 100% set will have closed that gap.
Brian, before you continue forward, there are a couple questions in the chat.
Sure.
I can go ahead and read them out for those that may not be available, may not be able to see the chat. Dick Steinberg is asking, why would the estimated completion for Benson be planned at 4.4 million below the target PPS contingency? And for purposes of carrying over the 2017 shortfall into the 2020 needs, wouldn't it be better to program a full project contingency? And then Karen Wheeland is asking, is ANCO doing both the buildings, Benson and MPG?
Yes, Anderson is under contract for both Benson and MPG, yes, and as well as Marshall. The work, just to go on, the work at Kenton will be, we're planning on bidding that out for a public bid. For the previous question on estimated completion, what I can say as far as the project team is that we're showing a budget that works within the 357 million. We know that the constraints that I was working under or had set this up under was that we had a certain budget that we had for swing sites. So that would give us the umbrella budget for Marshall and Kenton. We have a board approved amount for multiple pathways building, and that, along with the fact that the budgets for the construction were in alignment with the third-party estimates to set the target GMP. I don't know what further to say other than that it balances to the 357. I think the decision, it's further discussion on what happens with, what happens to cover the gap, or if it is covered at all, as we move further into the project.
Brian, there's another question from Kevin Spellman asking how precise the estimate is for the FF&E and also for the miscellaneous technology.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the estimate for FF&E that line item is currently based on previous projects, so we have not had a full a detailed enough design to fully get that estimated by a third party at this time. Our target is to use the 100% DD documents to start that conversation with the third party providers to get a more detailed estimate. But currently the numbers are based on what we've seen historically from the previous projects, and with some evaluation for consideration for the CTE component, which we know is going to be more expensive than a typical classroom. The miscellaneous technology number is a number that's come from our IT group. So that I believe is estimates based again on their cost data criteria and historical costs for systems. They've done a pretty detailed project charter that includes all of the scope and components that they see in the project so far at the SD and DD level. So the numbers that we're showing here are straight from our IT group's estimate. So fairly detailed for the information that they have available, but certainly will be refined as we get into CDs. Any further questions on Benson itself? And Marina, do we have time to do a quick touch on MPG and the other two slides, or do you want to hold up here?
I assume we do, Dan.
Yes, we would like to talk about multiple pathways building.
Okay. The update that we're showing here is that really on MPG, currently it's fairly straightforward for us on where it's at this time. We just came through the end of the master planning phase, and that was accompanied by a third-party estimate, which the number for construction is reflected here. And also, of note, we're carrying a contingency that combined inside and outside the GMP, or the number that we're carrying for those owner revisions within the construction line item. We're currently at a 15% contingency versus the 10% OSM standard. So,
Brian? Yeah, Norton Dowdy with BAC. Quick question. So the estimate was based on the master plan conceptual level information. What is the process when you get that budget from the third-party cost estimator of reviewing it and deeming it appropriate?
So we work within the means that we have as the project team to review that against whatever cost information we have at the time, right? That's available to us, like just straight on, just for the project team itself. So we can look at cost per square foot from an equivalent building. So we can take that avenue. In this instance, we do have Anderson here as well. We're just now getting under contract with them to head in for their pre-construction contract. So certainly, and to start up on the SD phase. So the intent here is in the SD phase is that we can also get their real market data against the cost data that we have for from CFI. To note on the MPG building, we have master plans with an intent, with a direction that's been kind of integrated in with the design intent, and that is to go with CLT as the structural system for this building. And that's actually woven in. So the cost data that the estimator was using for this is woven in with some industry feedback that we were getting early in the master planning process to even go with to even think about going with CLT. So I will say that's woven into the estimate.
Yeah, I looked through the budget, and it was actually pretty detailed for a conceptual level budget.
Yeah.
And it did denote CLT and various other things. I was just, obviously the first number is really important, but it's based on the least amount of information. So
yeah,
the kind of the scrutiny and questioning of it, and getting the input from the architects and everyone to deem it appropriate is obviously very critical. So.
Yeah, one thing to note here too is that Anderson, in particular, the project executive that we have assigned to us on Benson, his name is Brad Nile, and he, along with one of his co-workers at partners within Anderson, so to speak, they have really done a lot of work in the CLT arena, and have developed a really good set of lessons learned and criteria and cost data around CLT. They've done a couple different projects now. They're just finishing up the one at OSU. They're finishing one down here in Southeast Portland. I think they've done at least one or two others. So they're really kind of a wealth of knowledge for us. So they provided some of that backup for us as well at this point, what they could.
Hi, this is Tom Peterson. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Hi, Tom.
I have a question. Also, I'm looking at this budget breakdown, and so just to make sure I understand, Anderson has provided you an estimate as well on this?
No, what they've provided so far is just some input to some of this square footage numbers, the initial square footage numbers.
So then my question is, this estimate looks like you've already have a GMP estimate, and so you're looking at your contingency as a combination of what's inside a GMP and what's outside of a GMP. But the reality is you don't even have an estimate from a contractor that would be a basis for a GMP. So that's I'm kind of trying to understand the logic of the rationale there.
Sure. What we've done is the estimate itself includes, how we look at that is that the construction estimate itself that comes in from the third party includes a line item for owner and design contingency. And that is what we equate to what will be converted to that line item within the GMP contract. So for instance, when we're going to benchmark our GMP amount, we're going to take that amount and say that's our target to keep, while maintaining that overall $46 million for a GMP construction contract. So we're not using that to somehow create a base design that includes that and then place another contingency on top of it. Our goal is to design to that number of 46 minus that owner design contingency.
Okay. I'm also curious, the initial estimates are mostly based on square footage costs. There's really no breakdown at this point of any types of specific materials. It's just more or less a square footage cost for the various systems at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly. Okay. I think appropriate for master planning.
I want to jump in on that a little bit too, because your estimate, the 62 million, is based on the professional estimators' numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever I can't remember their name, but anyway.
Yeah, that's correct.
They had a number of exclusions, though, including the activity tax And
Correct.
and some of the work, it seems like special foundation support, structural steel for load bearing or seismic, fire rated wall assemblies. What have we done with those exclusions?
Those items when we took a look at those items, we didn't think that they would necessarily apply to the project
the
after.
activity tax applies for sure.
Correct. And specific to the activities tax, the budgets that we've included here, just for what for specific to Benson, are not anticipated to carry that corporate activities tax.
Why not?
Those numbers are being carried by the program, Kevin. That's why we have the corporate activities tax line item in our program budgets.
Okay, so that's $4 million, as I remember, right? Something like that.
That's what we are currently showing.
That's supposed to cover Benson and Lincoln, and maybe Madison.
At this point, the only one that is written into contract is Lincoln.
Okay, so how much is it on Lincoln?
We're still working through that.
I have a
we have an estimate that we got from prior to from quite a bit prior to when it was actually implemented. It's a good estimate, but each contractor has to come up with a slightly different percentage based on their business income, their corporate income. And so we are working through the details with the contractor for Lincoln on exactly how much they will be charging for that on an upfront basis.
Okay, well, I'm not sure what we do with that information, Maureen. I don't know if that tells us $4 million is enough or it's not. So anyway, also just to be clear, we got to the 62 million, including undefined VE, right? As well, $330,000.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did we do? This is not a loaded question aimed at you, Brian, or anyone else in OSM, but no one did any work, I'm assuming, on the cost required to upgrade the seismic capacity of this building.
Are you talking specifically an upgrade from current code to immediate occupancy?
Yeah.
We have not. Not specifically. We've had discussions about what kind of a range that might be, low, medium, high impact, but we have not talked specific dollars at this point.
Okay.
I want to follow up to Kevin's question as well. So it sounds like there was some initial estimate, some exceptions to things that may or may not be in the project. That sounds like you assume that they won't be, so you're not carrying any dollars for them. But I guess I would also say at this point, would there be, now I recognize it's a new structure, so there's some advantages that come with that and maybe less risks than you would have associated with a remodel. But nonetheless, it seems like it would be prudent to have some form of a risk assessment evaluation that kind of helps you justify if that's the right contingency level or not for the project, as opposed to just relying on a standard OSM standard. I'd be more comfortable hearing some kind of a rationale that says, we've looked at this, here's what we think the risks are. This is like a low risk. But as a result, we think maybe it's worth having, this is maybe worth so many dollars. And then you kind of measure that up with, well, how does that compare with what percentage contingency you're carrying for the overall project? Might be something to think about as well, to help us feel like we're confident that the numbers you have are going to kind of stand the test of time. I don't recognize we can't predict everything, but I think that would be useful going forward.
Brian, this is Dick Steinberg. I've got two additional questions regarding the MPG budget estimate.
Okay.
And I compared the current budget with the one that had been listed as May 2019. And I saw two things that caught my eye that perhaps you could comment on. One was it appeared that the escalation estimate between those two dates had been reduced by about $5 million. And so I wondered if you could comment on that. And then I also noticed in the display that was presented at a meeting before, for offsite improvements, the note was not included. So I didn't know if that meant yet to come, or there weren't any, or maybe they were part of the basic Benson budget because of the proximity.
Yeah, good questions. First, regarding the escalation, that was a realignment of anticipated buyout schedule. So initially, CFI had assumed a schedule that would have pushed the start of construction for MPG out towards the end of the program. And our plan is to start that sooner, close to probably a year and a half or more sooner than what they had anticipated. So that equated obviously to a reduction in the escalation that we were comfortable in carrying. For the offsite improvements, that is work that we don't anticipate being an issue for MPG due to its location. The work that we're seeing that might pertain to that is already covered under the Benson project along, what is it, Northeast 15th. So, but we don't anticipate any offsite improvements based on feedback from our design team for the other street frontages.
Can I follow up again on that escalation question? And this probably isn't a question for you, Brian. It's more for Marina and maybe Dan, because this applies to every project. Have we done any work with our professional advisors on their current assumptions with regard to escalation, given the fact that the world has turned upside down here in the last few months? Or it looks to me like, and I can't really tell on the MPG, but many of the other packets of work that you've given us, you know, the escalation assumptions are from pre-COVID days. Now, I don't know that they should go up or down, but I doubt that they're the same. So my question is, what kind of input have you received, and how are we accommodating that input?
I can speak to what we've talked about on Benson. We certainly, that's been a topic of conversation here recently as we head towards the 100% DD benchmark estimate. Had conversations with Anderson's chief estimator to try to get a handle on that. We're also working with the design team that works not only here in Portland, but in some of the other regional areas, Seattle, you know, other regional areas as well. I got it just based on our feedback, Kevin, it's really hard to tell. It's just even though we've been into the COVID environment for a few months now, we're really not seeing things settle out in a uniform way. Each trade has taken this impact, and each location has taken this impact differently across the board. So in some cases, we're finding lower than anticipated bids and estimates because people want to keep people employed. And in other areas that they've got restricted labor, so their prices are going up because there are productivity losses during that. So it's really been too early for us to tell or establish a new baseline.
Right, I understand the challenge, and you know what's happening today is maybe an indicator, but it's not determinative. I mean, what we're talking about is what's it going to be next year and the year
Right.
after and the year
That's
after
right.
that. And for instance, you know, this is a worldwide thing, I think, but RLB, who we use a lot, has published some data that says most people in the industry, I don't know who they're using, but think that costs will decrease from 0 to 9%. Now, I don't know that that's right, and I certainly wouldn't advocate that that we reduce our budgets by based on that. But it seems like this is an important enough piece. I mean, the total amount of escalation that we have in this bond package is pretty substantial, and we should do everything we can with our professionals to try and get some guidance in that area.
Okay.
Dan, we need to check in on time here because we're already at 3:30.
Yeah.
You know, I'm prepared to stay a few minutes longer. I don't know about anyone else, but I have to go before 4 o'clock, and I'm sure others do too. And we have so much more to do. I'm wondering if we should, it seems like maybe we need another session, maybe as soon as next week. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably wise. I think we've been through the most detailed pieces, and but we're not going to get through everything and all the questions in 2 minutes. My best guess. So we can look to schedule something next week as well, and go through the remaining materials if we'd like to stop now, or answer some other questions now, or if there's anything specific you'd like to hit with our remaining time.
Maybe we could, I assume we've got slides for the swing sites that related to Benson. Maybe
Correct.
We should just try to finish up the Benson piece, so at least we have a natural stopping point.
Okay.
This is Director Constam. If I can interject for just a second, Kevin, and say that from the board perspective, I would like to follow up on your comment and ask, get with Deputy Superintendent Hertz and Dan and Marina to definitively see whether we have as much guidance as we can on the question of appropriate escalation rates to include in this bond, because if we need to commission a little more analysis from our outside estimators, that's certainly worth it to make sure that we're in the right zone. So I just want to follow up on our side of things. I concur, and we'll make sure that we've done everything we can and we should to answer that question.
Great, thanks, Amy.
Okay. Moving on then to Marshall. Want to give a summary here that so for Marshall itself, it's broken down into 2 main components. We've got the TI work, or the tenant improvement work, on the existing structure itself, and then we've got the new CTE annex. That is the new building, about 20,000 square feet for for the auto shop and for construction programs. As we've worked through the design progress, we were carrying a $6 million budget for the new building, and about 3.5 initially for the interior renovation work. Where we are at currently is that we just signed an early work authorization for the first part of the TI work, but have an estimate for the overall piece of that we're still negotiating, but is currently at 3.3 million. So we came in slightly under our budget on the TI work. For the new construction of the CT annex, that's in a little bit different state. We had been carrying, like I said, 6 million. our current estimate from CFI is at 7.7. So we've got some work to go for that. Early estimates were based on feedback from Anderson Construction, actually, and a couple of components that went into that cost impact were a couple things. One is much more site development work that was initially anticipated in that budget to fit the new building into that east landscape, or that's currently a grass area out on the east side of the campus. There was some more site work development for the placement there. And then there was also a requirement that was added that was not initially anticipated, and that had to do with City of Portland requirements for us to bring the site up for non-conforming items that were at issues out at Marshall. So that definitely hit us. That was unanticipated. We are currently working through a number of VE options to close the gap for that new building. The current design has a number of things that we can, opportunities that we can reduce in terms of its finishes. We have another sample of things. It's another structure that we're looking at for more efficiency with the MEP and low voltage design that we think we've got quite a bit of room to go. And also we think important to this is that this building is going to be, we're planning, it's been designed around to be a pre-engineered metal building, and that vendor selection is out on the street and will be completed here in July. And we think that's going to be an important component to reconfirm our assumptions around the cost of the metal building structure itself. We'll just say that, for example, we already have early indication that there's cost savings measures that some of them have looked at the project and think they can bring to the table as well on the structure itself. Currently, overall, our contingency is just over $2 million, which is 16%, and so just over the OSM standard. We are, like I said, we are looking at this project kind of in two different categories for the TI work and the annex. But we are in the design, the team's been doing a lot of work, and I think are in within some reasonable reach of achieving the budget targets. So, any questions on Marshall or where we're at today?
Brian, the one question I've got is, you've got $10,000 for FF&E.
Yeah.
Is everything just coming from Benson? Is that what's...
That's correct. That's correct. There's a vast majority of that FF&E that is either coming from Benson or will not stay at Marshall. So it will become a Benson asset anyway. So that we'll move back out with them back to Benson. So there's very little that we're needing to buy that will remain at Marshall.
Okay, but we don't have any moving services budget.
No, we've got that covered in the main project. That's fully covered under the main project.
Kevin, this is Greg. I just have an overall question. These contingency things, we have a standard, but then we have a number on each single project. Is the standard just there to give us an idea, or why aren't we just putting in the standard? Do you know things that require your contingency to be higher or lower on each of these projects?
Greg, I think that kind of goes back to my earlier comment about each project is unique. Each project has a different set of risks. And so a standard is a guideline, but I'm more inclined to make sure that each project looks at contingency based on risk and a whole bunch of other factors to justify why it should be higher or lower than the standard. It's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, but we don't see what the risks are that might drive the contingency up or down. So I have no idea why they, or maybe we do, and I don't remember it. Why they pick 16, right?
No, I agree. I think that's what's missing. And that's what my earlier comment was, that alluding to is that it would be more useful to have in the future to have more of a discussion about the risk and things that could affect contingency and how you're using those, assessing those risks in a way, and how that then equates to what level of contingency you need. That isn't there right now. I agree with you that. But I think in the future, I think that would be more useful, because then it gets to your point. Why is it above or below?
Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Dan here. I'll jump in real quick, and as a little bit of clarity, not to fully answer that question, is when we talk about the standards. So when we have a new construction project, we use 10% as the standard at the start, and then any renovation work we start at 15. So regardless of what the project is, that's where we use as our starting points. That's why we call it the standard. During the course of the project, that contingency may go up or down, and the projects do carry risk logs. So, and of course, during the course of a project, your contingency is always going to go down. And there are certain thresholds that we generally look as we move through different phases of design, as we move through construction, but totally accurate. Every project is different. Every project has different risks. So when we get into projects, further into design and certainly into construction, we start codifying those risks and those risk logs a little bit more. And maybe to help answer the question a little bit, I might ask Marina to describe an example of what the risk log is that we use for Madison, for example. And I believe the BAC has seen it, that I can't recall offhand, but I think that might get to the type of information you need. We're certainly having those discussions about risk on these projects on Benson and MPG. But I think what you're saying is, let us see it in that more codified form that we've shared in the past.
Thank you, Dan. Just a quick description of the risk registers that we're using. I think you've seen, let me clarify. Some of the new BAC members may not have necessarily seen Madison's risk register. Those that have been here a little bit longer have seen it, and we continue to develop our template, sort of expand the template for those risk registers. But essentially what it does is it identifies risks as they're going forward through construction under certain categories, and assigns a certain amount of contingency for those risks, and then tracks against that to see how the risk is being reduced, and what's happening with the contingency against that. So this is something that was relatively new for the bond program. So we have been refining that template for the risk register in coordination with our performance auditors, in fact, and trying to make it better and better as we move forward. But the intent really is to put a number to identifiable risks, and identifiable can be identifiable in a large sense. So we may not know the exact details, but we can guess that there's a potential for something, or it could be a very detailed identified risk. And once we've gone past the point where it's a risk, once we've mitigated it or we've moved past it, it no longer exists, then we're updating those registers accordingly and looking at our contingency accordingly.
Okay, Dan.
I do recall seeing those. They were really well done too, as I recall. I was just thinking that a little bit more of that in this, in some of the Benson would have been helpful and kind of a refresher for the rest of us.
I think that's a fair point, Tom. We have started having that discussion with the Benson team about bringing that risk register into the design. Mm-hmm. What we have typically done in the past is started those with the construction. Right. But as we refine that process, I do think that bringing that level of detail to the design would be helpful.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, that has a follow on to that. I noticed, like in the MPG, between the budgets, there's, between the SD and the DD, there's 6 months, and then there's actually from the DD estimate to when the bid comes in, there's 12 months. So some kind of tracking of, asking the team, okay, where's the risk? How are we doing on costs during those between those major budget milestones, and that might be an appropriate tool in those times.
Yeah. Dan, I think we should wrap this up. I will send to you and Marina just a short list of the items that I've kept a note of that have been raised here. Not then you obviously do what you wish with them, but at least we'll be able to track them. And the rest of the BAC, if there's anything that whether we've touched on it or not, if it's of particular interest to you, email it to me and I'll make sure it gets included with the appropriate amount of emphasis. Then I would hope we can schedule something right away. We don't really have much time here to be doing too many iterations of this. So does that make sense?
Yeah, this is Dan. I think that sounds like a good plan, and we'll look to get something scheduled as soon as possible.
Hey, Dan, this is Tom again, and I'm sorry to bring this up. I was having trouble with my audio early on. I tried to ask this question early on. It's in terms of the upcoming events leading up to the bond. And the one thing that, if I recall, was a factor in the last bond was polling in terms of what the voters would be willing to spend. And I didn't hear any mention of that in the process and how that plays into the final numbers. But I think it would be useful to kind of know how that plays into your decision making as well. Having managed a campaign many, many years ago, I know how important it is to have a sense of what the voters' appetite is before you take it out on the street. And I'm sure, particularly in these times, it's even a bigger concern. So it'd be interesting just to know how that's going to play into the decision. Not that we necessarily weigh in, but it just helps us know, how this is coming together.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And from the materials early on, I think mentally, I love pulling up into the community input aspect of that. That said, polling has happened, polling continues to happen, so we can look to get some summary of that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'll ask, we're dwindling numbers, but we still have quite a few. Are there any final questions before we sign off? Okay, hearing none. I appreciate everyone's time, and we will be in touch again very shortly.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.